So I was doing a little research piece on, where do we get the idea of breakfast is the most important meal of the day? And if you do the research, it's from Kellogg. It's from the Kellogg company because they wanted to have us all eat breakfast. I guess prior to Kellogg, whoever ate breakfast, it was whatever was left over from dinner. And that's what people would eat for breakfast. Maybe it was some eggs, bacon, etc. But once Kellogg, they made this idea that breakfast is the most important meal, which is from Kellogg. It just shows you how pervasive.
Well, it was actually from Ellen G. White, who was the prophetess of the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Right. But I thought it was with the Kellogg person.
Oh, yeah, there were Kellogg's. And then Lena Cooper was also a promoter of that one. And she was working with Kellogg's, and she was the first. She set up the American Dietetics Association in October 23, 1917. So essentially, if we have a belief, then it's really important to work out where that belief comes from. Because if it's not based on science, it's not, as it turns out, all this stuff, breakfast doesn't have to be in the morning. It's breaking your fast. You can do it. Belinda has forever broken her fast at lunchtime. And I used to say, look, your breakfast is the most important meal of the day. You've got to have your breakfast. Here I am having my cereal and, and a bit of fruit and a bit of whole grain bread, and a little bit of chocolate, but I was 20 kilos, 45 pounds heavier. But I'd say, you've got to have breakfast. And Belinda's health was perfect until I forced her to start having some breakfast, and she got a bit, just got a little bit unwell. It's all there in history. So I call that generational education. And again, there's a talk on, I keep coming back to YouTube because it's easier to put that talk on YouTube because I can put the visuals with it, give the story, people allocate 20, 25 minutes, and you'll get the stories from my work, Belinda's work. Because I think it's often better to use pictures, just certainly with the biochemistry and pathways and one of the things I got accused of by the medical board was actually making the situation too simple. I said, my job is to actually explain things in terms which people can actually understand. And I'm going, but that's my job. That's what I'm supposed to do. I had to defend my job of actually communicating. And health education needs to be aimed at a 10-year-old at a health literacy rate. Have you heard of that?
Yes, and
it's no use. It's not at a high academic level. You've got to aim your message at a 10-year-old for understanding. And I'm not trying to dumb down patients. I'm just saying that's where your message has got to be. So my lectures are not for 10-year-olds. I call them for the interested layperson or the introduction for the medical. They're there, and then off you go and explore from there. So if it's not about the science, you've got to work out where it came from. Sure. And therefore you've got to go back in history. And I call that generational education. So I believe my teachers because they must know. And you believe your textbooks because it's in the textbook.
Right.
And you've got to and the references are there, and because it's in the textbook, it's all there. And the same, but if you start going back in time, that time frame between 1910 and 1917, absolutely critical for medical education. So the American Dietetics Association formed 1917. The next 40 years of textbooks are written by Lena Cooper, which then formed the basis of textbooks for the American Dietetics Association, the Canadian, the British, the South African, the Australian, and the New Zealand. They literally, that model and those textbooks became, that's nutrition. Right. However, if you go back to those textbooks written by Leonard Cooper, who had been heavily influenced in working with Kellogg's, are vegan, vegetarian, anti-meat. We've got some textbooks. We've got a couple of them from the 1920s, early 1920s, readily available. Just get on, Amazon and Aid Books, and you can get hold of these books. In fact, strangely enough, a present I gave to Belinda was to actually find Ellen G. White's writings, as 20 volumes of them. Forget giving Belinda flowers. If you give her research material, she loves it. So that 1917, critical time in nutrition. We'll go backwards and forwards from there. Sure. But in medicine, 1910 was the commissioning of the Flexner Report by Carnegie and Rockefeller. So at that point in time, we had a big influence of holistic healthcare, naturopathy, but what happened was the Flexner Report was commissioned and ended up closing, I think, around about 50 medical schools in the US and Canada. And as a result of that, you had the birth of the model of to medicate and to operate. That's what I also say the birth of the model of medical education, which is read, repeat, reward. Read the textbook, repeat it, medical career, follow the guidelines, don't question anything. And again, birth of the pharmaceutical industry and the modern hospital institution. So that as a result, we've got 100 years of influence of the pharmaceutical industry writing our textbooks and the processed food industry writing our nutrition textbooks. And so it's hard to go back and disbelieve everything you've been taught. But that's what we've done. And then you find out actually everything I've touched is a house of cards, whether or not it's sugar, carbs, fiber, salt, meat being bad. Everything's just a house of cards. It's just fascinating to see how we've gotten it so wrong. Now I understand why we've gotten it wrong, because of our education. And so that whole, to go back to the cereal industry, 101 cereal companies formed from Battle Creek, Michigan, late 1890s to 1905, something like that. Virtually all of them were under the influence of the Seventh-day Adventist origins. Not all of them, but most of them ultimately. So you've actually got to work out, why did they invent breakfast cereal? So John Harvey Kellogg invented breakfast cereal. He'd started the Battle Creek, Michigan. Well, he didn't start it, but he built the Battle Creek, Michigan hospital, sanitarium there, which that sanitarium then formed the basis of all Western major hospitals. That whole big model of big hospitals, multiple levels, multiple people coming in and out of it, was all based on the Battle Creek Sanitarium. John Harvey Kellogg, brilliant man, just mucked up in his ideas. But then if you work out where his ideas came from, you're not surprised. So as it turns out, John Harvey Kellogg, as a 12-year-old, went to work for the first family of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, the White family. Ellen G. White as the prophetess. I'm just cutting it all down. Linda's works there. As a 12-year-old, he was typesetting her books, and her first literary work that she was about that the most sinful thing is to masturbate. So if you masturbate, you'll go to hell for all damnation. So imagine a 12-year-old typesetting in that temperance movement, mid-19th century, that whole complete brainwashing. So he was nurtured through the Ellen G. White family, became the first medical director of the Battle Creek Sanitarium. He set up all of this stuff, but his flow-on effect was that he was brainwashed as a kid. Ended up having 8 children through marriage. Apparently never consummated his marriage, so they were all adopted. And in the 1890s, he and his brother developed breakfast cereal as a bland food to be served in the Battle Creek, Michigan Sanitarium to quell our lustful thoughts, to stop us from masturbating. And as a result of that, and a whole lot of those theories were there to actually, quell lust for salvation. That became incredibly influential, because that became the hospital model for the Western world. It became the dietetics model for the Western world. And that influence, because then became corporate structures there. And the Adventist Church were influential to this day. They're the second biggest educator in the world after the Catholic Church. They don't bear arms. So they were the conscientious objectors, which likely Ansel Keys was experimenting on with his starvation diets, and he would have had a lot of work. They are the origins of the vegan vegetarian. But today, they effectively own the cereal industry of the world, the soy industry, the commercial processed soy industry, the fake meat industry. So the nut analogues, the meat analogues, all started by Kellogg's, are heavily involved in the stevia industry. They've got so much money, and here in Australia, they don't need to declare it because they're a church organisation and a charity. They are effectively the cereal industry here in Australia. And so either directly or indirectly, there's an enormous amount of money pushing into the church. The church keep having their message of health reform. Ellen G. White, late 19th century, was saying that health education is the right arm of God. It's this is how we're going to get into people's lives. They do a major amount of missionary work. So this whole influence, particularly in the South Pacific, the blue continent, I think 4 or 5 of the prime ministers of those Polynesian islands are now Seventh-day Adventists. And we've got to push into Polynesia, which are the most obese, the highest diabetic rates in the world. Everyone sort of says, we've got the greatest rates of diabetes, or we're the fattest society. No, the blue Pacific, 9 out of the top 10, the fattest, sickest, most metabolic unwell. So we've actually got now a major push into the Polynesian islands of breakfast cereals and taking them away from their traditional diets, which are going to be animal-based because of fishing. And number 10 on that list, I'm going back 2 or 3 years now, was Kuwait. You know why Kuwait's up there with obesity and diabetes?
Don't they really like honey? I thought it was like they like to add honey.
They do, but they don't have alcohol. So they drink soft drink, sugar sweetened beverages. So it's sort of, they've got this, alcohol embargo, but they have a major influence. So that's, and sugar sweetened, soft drinks, we call soda in the US, is those populations with higher intakes of that have got significantly greater rates of obesity and ill health. Robert Lustig's obviously done a lot of work on that.
Right. So I have a question. Since we're talking about a lot of this, do you think these people really believe that this bland cereal will fix all the issues that human transgressions, or is it just really money focused? I mean, I know that back in the day, Rockefeller, from my understanding, is that after the war, he had all this petroleum, and so he wanted to switch all the natural supplements and herbals to now be the pharmaceuticals with petroleum. And so that's where a lot of that the medical school changed. And I think that you had just mentioned, but I mean, is it just pure evil? Is it just money and they don't care if people get sick, or is it like a mix of both?
No, I think without being too cynical and too depressing, I suffer from hyper-pragmatism.
Okay.
So I'm not depressed. I'm just going, okay, well, this is what's going on. Where do you position yourself into it? So that model was started early 20th century, not early 1900s. And when we had the development of nutrition reviews, the literature, the research, the Harvard School of Public Health, all started with processed food money. And so with Rockefeller and Carnegie then supporting education that supported their model, if you wanted to build your university, you'd get, and so many places in the US have got money from the Rockefeller Foundation, because they're influencing continuing that model. Is that evil? Possibly. So, but and that commercial model keeps tying in with this religious ideation. So as it turns, Belinda's done a lot of work on this. She's still contacted by people who are part of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, current and ex. Her work's actually been quoted by the Adventists in journals, as she's actually recognised by the Adventist Church as an expert in their work. So her work's actually referenced by them. We really fell over when we found that it was referenced. But unfortunately, those people I'm not anti-Adventist, we're not anti-religion. We just, if it's what they're doing with their message. If you can have your opinion, you can have your religious ideology. It shouldn't just be forced literally down my throat or down my patient's throat. And they honestly believe that religious salvation, and when the world comes around to believing in veganism, that Christ will return. But for salvation of 144,000. So they will go to enormous sacrifices personally because in a religious ideological belief. So I don't believe the Adventists are in it for the money. At the highest level, I think they are. They've got this great business model which is going on. But the person on the ground doing the door-to-door work, who's now been involved in dietary guidelines, and literally, it's not just now, even though we've got them right through the most recent dietetics review in the US. We've got them literally positioned at the highest levels. We've got them positioned at the highest levels within the World Health Organization, involvement in the United Nations, presidents, prime ministers of countries, treasurers of countries. This is a small group of people that have been able to move up, and whether or not they've been propped up along the way they've worked very, very hard for over 100 years to get themselves into positions of public health, because that's the position of religious salvation for us all. We don't have to, it's almost fantastical, but that's what's happened. It's not a conspiracy if it turns out to happen, So they've positioned themselves, and that, I don't think that's evil. These are well-intentioned people who really believe in their product, in their message. They've got this enormous corporate arm behind them, which has continued to make an enormous amount of money and vertically integrate themselves from the farming sector through to the production sector, even to the pharmaceutical sector, all owned by the church. Not paying taxes, and that's evil. In whatever term you want to describe it. So, is it just evil? No, I don't. But again, if your livelihood, if your whole social circumstances are based about, and you're a child being brought up in this, it's really interesting. A couple of people I've worked with, my surgical assistant was raised as an Adventist. We have some amazing discussions. Just one of my anaesthetists, was raised as an Adventist, and so and all the stuff about vegetarian veganism being beneficial is actually just because the Adventist Church keeps coming up with the same study over and over again. The Adventist health studies, which are well and truly cited thousands of times, but they're cited by, so if we look up on research and then the number of times there's been a citation, it's a high citation article. There's only ever been three Adventist big health studies, and they've actually cited themselves thousands of times. So again, that is truly sitting within your echo chamber. That is, you're inside your bubble saying, we have the longest longevity. We have the longest longevity. So if you keep hearing that for decades, but then I actually took apart those studies and actually found the Mormons live longer, and the Jewish communities in the US were living longer than the Adventists. But the Adventists actually believe, they eat healthy, even though it's not no animal based. Don't smoke, don't drink alcohol, get exercise, and all of those things are actually healthy things to do. So a lot of their stuff's actually quite good. Just that anti-meat, pro-grain, cereal corporatization of our food pyramid is done more harm.